Welcome to another episode of the Soothing Semantics podcast. I am your host, Rafi Pinsky. Make sure, as usual, to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, leave your likes and your comments. And of course, South Florida real estate, I would love to be of assistance. You can follow me at Rafi the Realtor on Instagram. Today we have a Brit, another Brit. I had Tommy Robinson, and now I have the good fortune of sitting down with.
I'm actually a Polish South African, Rafi. I just have a British accent.
I was going to
I grew
ask you
up in the UK.
I was going to ask you what the deal was with the Polish pictures in the background. If you had Polish
But,
ancestry, that's a good.
but close enough.
Okay, we got. Hey, well, you're still a British citizen.
I still am, yes.
Okay, and you have the accent throws. I mean, the accent throws me off. You still like a good fish and chips. That's it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I haven't had one in ages, but yes.
Okay. Well, I didn't even have one when I visited, dude. I can't believe it. My buddies were like, "You have to go. You have to do it." I didn't even have any fish and chips there. Unbelievable. So Stefan is the co-founder of Visegrád. Visegrád is one of the more prominent journalism pages. They cover all kinds of politics, what's happening in England, what's happening in Europe. They really do a good job in keeping everybody up to date on what's going on. If I missed anything, please continue to introduce Visegrád.
Sure. Visegrád is a new media company that's social media first. Its primary mission is, well, I suppose its primary mission is the promotion of the transcendental, of that which is good, true, and beautiful. It started out focusing on Central and Eastern Europe, so trying to explain to a Western audience, actually not just a Western audience, an Anglo audience, an English language audience, what is happening in Central and Eastern Europe. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we did a slight pivot, and we now primarily cover what happens in Europe to a certain extent, and then essentially we've pivoted to becoming the voice of the voiceless in a variety of conflicts, from obviously the Ukrainians who've been invaded by Russia, but also of Cuban dissidents fighting against communism, of Venezuelan dissidents fighting against Maduro, of Nigerian Christians who've been suffering under a silent genocide for over a decade, which has been an ignored catastrophe, absolute humanitarian tragedy, to also the voice of South African farmers who are being expropriated and whose livelihoods and properties are under threat. So essentially, fundamentally, we are a conservative news organization that aggregates news and provides coverage and that coverage of conflicts is obviously, I wouldn't say, it doesn't try to be, we don't look at the Russian invasion of Ukraine and say, oh, let's stay objective. So in that specific case, we have been obviously very supportive of Ukraine's efforts for a variety of reasons. Obviously, firstly, because they've been invaded. And the same goes for example, the Israel-Hamas war. Oftentimes the criticism that's levied against us is saying, oh, you're not being sufficiently objective about this. And my answer to that is very simple, is if you want the Palestinian side of the conflict, there are I was going to say a million, but there really are, I think, well over a million accounts that you could go follow tomorrow, tomorrow, that will provide you an endlessly biased pro-Palestinian view of that conflict. In fact, that the coverage of that conflict has been pretty shameful. So we don't necessarily look at a conflict and say, oh, both sides need to have an equal treatment. The same goes of, say, the Iranian dissidents. We've done a lot of work covering Iranian dissidents who've been fighting against the Ayatollah and the mullahs, and fighting against the Islamists who've taken control of their country. And the Iranian diaspora is a very large, very successful, very interesting minority that's done fantastic work in many fields, but that have also been impressive at organizing around various. We obviously have various factions. You have the faction that is the pro-Shah faction. You have the more liberal factions that are rallied behind Masih al-Nishad, and then you have you have there's a rather large number of various organizations that are active, and we don't look at that and say, oh, we need to provide objective coverage of the Ayatollah and why the Ayatollah does this and that and why he runs Iran as an Islamist state. So that is Visegrád 24. Sorry, Rafi,
Okay.
I interrupted.
No,
I interrupted your intro.
no, please, please,
But that's
please.
the
Listen,
context.
I've realized with the podcast, in my mind, there's a period where it's good for me. I take the angle and I say, okay, now I'm going to stop him and get and kind of take it in a certain direction. I like that. When it flows, it's fine. People who are going to listen are going to listen. People who won't. It's not an issue for me. I don't try to force the discussion too much. There's a nice yin and yang, I guess you could say. Uh, an interesting thing, because Visegrád does seem to be much more on the pro-Israel side, or at least it gives the pro-Israel side a voice when so much of the world now, so much of the media paints Jews in Israel in a bad light, especially because being anti-Israel seems to get more views than being pro-Israel. I mean,
100%.
talking about Jews in general will get you views on social media, but speaking negatively seems to do even better. Now, a funny question, but a direct question is, if you knew you could get considerably more traction saying things that seem negative or at least neutral, why do you choose to go the route you do? Do you simply believe in what you're saying? I mean, it sounds redundant, but I want to hear it from you, of course.
I wouldn't have put so much work into things that I don't believe. So I think first of all, I guess the really interesting thing, is I grew up with many Jews. In London, I grew up with two twins who were their grandmother had escaped the Warsaw Ghetto. They were very close friends growing up. The French lycée that I went to had a large number of French Jews, sort of successful expats who'd sent their children there. And as a number of, I see my first girlfriend was a very liberal London Jewish girl whose parents were quite anti-Zionist, ironically enough. And we had very amusing debates.
We'll throw that conversation to a little bit later, but oh my God, that grinds my gears. There's so many of them in places like New York and
I was more
California.
supportive of Israel than she was, or her parents, which I thought was funny.
As a Jew, it's become a thing in our circles. The as a Jew, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. So,
Yeah.
and then, but to make it more interesting, I'm half Polish. There's a fairly big conflict around history between Israelis, Jews, not necessarily Israelis, Jews and Poles. And fundamentally, that conflict relies around one major thing, and it's the perception of victimhood during World War II. Jews, obviously enough, focus on Jewish suffering during World War II. Makes sense. Poles, as you would expect, focus on Polish suffering. So during the German occupation between 39 and 45, we had 3 million Polish Catholics that were killed, and we had obviously 3 million Polish Jews who were exterminated. Now the Germans fundamentally focused on exterminating European Jewry. However, in Generalplan Ost, there was a plan to eradicate Slavs, to turn them into a tiny population, and to have them as slave labor, barely educated enough to function as slaves. There was a series of operations, including AB-Aktion and Intelligenzaktion, in which the Germans focused on destroying the Polish elites. The aristocracy, lawyers, doctors, professors, anyone who was able to essentially counter the German threat in any way, shape, or form. There is a sort of misunderstanding, I think. I don't actually think that there's a fundamental clash. I think that there is a misunderstanding where Poles really, and then obviously we had 45 years of communism afterwards. And so the destruction of the Polish nation continued from 44 until, so when the Russians re-entered Poland, and the front was shifting, they then Warsaw has the Warsaw Uprising, not the Jewish one in 43. There's a Polish uprising in 44. the Russians, the Red Army stands on the one side of the Vistula and watches the city burn. The Germans kill about 200,000 Poles in the space of 63 days in a vicious urban fight. They carpet bomb the city, and then they destroy Warsaw brick by brick, literally blow up the cultural heritage and leave. And then the Russians come in, implement Moscow-imposed communism, and they continue the destruction of Polish elites. And they implement, one of the great horrors of communism is the implementation of kakistocracy, which is essentially empowering the worst people in your society, providing them with positions of power that they would never, ever have in any other circumstance, which means that they are willing to defend that position with everything that they have because they realize that without that system, they would be nothing. So we have the empowerment of the very worst types of people. And for 45 years, brutal repressions, continued killing of the elites, lack of ability to get education if you were an aristocrat, if you were from a family that had resisted totalitarianism, be it Nazism or communism, you would be sort of suppressed. And so many of these stories weren't even told. I mean, there's a horrific book written by Mieczysław Moczar, I believe, Conversations, Rozmowa z Katem, Conversations with my torturer. This was a Polish anti-Nazi fighter who ended up being jailed by the communists and sat in a cell with an SS officer. So you have this horror of communism kind of penalizing the Poles. So these stories were never told. The Jewish story of suffering obviously has been told, well documented. The Poles have felt that their story wasn't really understood. And so there was a bit of a clash. And amusingly enough, I made a video. Sorry for a very long-winded introduction. I was very fascinated by these stories.
It leads up to something. No, I think I appreciate it, Stefan, because I know it's important.
I told many of these stories. I spent, when I was in my early 20s, I made a very poor documentary film, literally filmed on a phone, where I interviewed about 120 Polish resistance fighters who fought the Germans, fought the communists, and then members of Solidarity who led to the overthrowing of communism in Poland. And so I had a great fascination with this. And a few years ago, there was the Polish government tried to implement a law, which came to be known as the Holocaust law, in which the Polish government was arguing that the Polish state had not collaborated with Nazi Germany, which is factually correct. The Poles, as a state, there was no Polish division of the SS. There was minimal collaboration. We obviously there was a criminal element, the Szmalcownicy, about 3,000 Poles who collaborated and sold Jews out to the Germans. But the context is important. You have a brutal occupation, the persecution of a people, schools have been closed, there are killings. Every single street in Warsaw that you walk down, there is a plaque commemorating a mass murder of Poles. Now, I don't need to explain this to a Jew, obviously, because Jews are very well aware of the horrors of German Nazism, right? But Jews are often unaware of the absolute horror of the occupation of Poland was not like the occupation of France, where the Germans behaved in comparison in a very civilized way. And so this is the sort of clash where Jews who survived the Holocaust in Poland have a memory of Polish anti-Semitism, will focus on Polish anti-Semitism, as opposed to the fact that Poles have the most righteous amongst the nations, that Poles didn't have Poles serving in the SS, that there was no Quisling government, there was no Vichy in Poland. Essentially, there was an attempted eradication of the Polish people. So I think our stories of suffering, obviously the scale is not the same, but I think there is a shared suffering, and there is a sort of misunderstanding where Poles will want to focus on the heroism of the resistance of 1 million Poles in the Polish underground, the establishment of Polish underground structures. Bear in mind that the Polish ambassador to London at the time, Count Edward Raczyński, was the first. He was the Polish ambassador. He wrote the Raczyński Note in 1942, in December of 1942, documenting, thanks to the Polish underground who had infiltrated Auschwitz. There was a report written by a soldier called Witold Pilecki, which was the first document evidencing the concentrated destruction of the Jewish people. And the ambassador wrote a note in 1942 addressed to all Allied governments, talking specifically about the extermination of Polish Jews. Very specific letter, the first one documenting that it was happening, a plea for help, saying, please make this end. And it wasn't just a plea. He wasn't talking about Polish citizens. It was an address specifically about Jewish citizens of Poland, saying these people are specifically being targeted. So obviously Polish history focuses on that. I made a video saying that I was against criminalizing speech, that I don't think the Holocaust law saying, you cannot talk about Poles that collaborated. I didn't think that was sensible, but I made this video explaining the Polish stance. It was a 7-minute video. It went quite viral on YouTube. And at the time, there were several comments, including from a young chap. It was called Itai. And Itai wrote, I completely disagree with what you say. When you're in Israel, come meet me. And I responded to this comment. So it was a very long story to get to this. I responded to this comment, I'll be there in a week. Send me your number. And a week later, I was in Israel with Itai Kahana, who became a very, very dear friend of mine, still is a very dear friend of mine.
Is the last name connected to Meir?
Yes, very distantly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And anyway, so Itai and I became dear friends, had long conversations in which we mostly disagreed, agreed to disagree on some stuff, but fundamentally became very good friends. He came to see me in Poland. And then when October 7th happened, the first call I made was to Itai. And that was the video was in 2019, October 7th.
But what are some things you disagreed on? That's what I'm very curious to know. To make it quick.
He fundamentally disagreed about, look, he wasn't a historian. He disagreed fundamentally about the treatment of Jews in Poland. I would still argue, and I think many Israelis that I'm dear friends with would disagree with me on this. And I think one of the reasons that they would disagree is if you were a Jew who survives the Holocaust, it would be very, very difficult to look positively at the country in which it happened, regardless of the fact that Poland didn't exist on the map of Europe from 1939 onwards. It would be very, and then bear in mind, obviously, the absolute horror of what happens. Now, the Jews that did stay in Poland after 44, 45, when the war comes to an end, many of them did end up being communists. The ones who weren't simply left, right? Why would you stay in a country that has become a communist hellhole? You wouldn't unless you agreed with the regime. This is actually a big point of contention between Poles and Israelis, where Poles look at the Jews that did, and there's a number of very, very tragic stories in which Polish Jews who survived the Holocaust then ended up being high-ranking communist officials. And this is a great point of contention and a great point of sort of, it's a very difficult historical topic, right? Where you have we go from having a very large community of Jews and this is sort of, I guess, the interesting part is the ones who were really assimilated in Warsaw were the ones who are most likely to survive. There was a large number of places in Poland, sort of shtetl Jews, who lived in fundamentally majority Jewish areas of Poland. I mean, you had places that were 30, 40, 50, 60%, including cities. I mean, Warsaw was 30-something% Jewish. Łódź was probably the great capital of Polish Jewry at the time. There's a great factory which was built by a man called Izrael Poznański. It was the great industrialist of his age, really impressive man who built this extraordinary palace at the back of his factory. All of that remains. It's been beautifully restored, by the way. It's a really fascinating place. It was a great place of clothing manufacturing at the time. So lots of seamstresses, very interesting. So this is a very interesting history, quite contentious. I suppose when you have a large, sizable minority, I mean, bear in mind, you're talking about a minority of 10 to 15% of the population. It's to be expected that you will have some tensions. I would argue fundamentally that there is more that unites us than divides us. I think that the contribution made by Polish Jews to Poland have been that some great contributions were made. And I think that, the great tragedy of certainly of the Polish-Israeli relationship is that so much of it focuses on World War II. and
Right.
ignores the fact that actually it's a 1,000-year-long history. It's much greater than just the story of World War II, and whatever happens next. So anyway, going back to the actual point, I called ITI on October 7th, the moment the news broke, and this is a really moving story. ITI was in Thailand on holiday. And I go, "Are you okay? How's your family?" And his family lives in a kibbutz. I said, "How are you? How's your family?" Everyone is fine. They weren't in a kibbutz close enough to have been affected. And but the moving part of the story was that the first thing that he did when he found out October 7th had happened was he headed to the airport, cut his holiday short. And he then waited. There were so many Israelis trying to get out of Thailand to go back to their families, and to go fight, essentially. It was a very moving. He ended up traveling back. An Israeli pilot allowed a number of them to stay. To essentially, they overloaded the flight, and he traveled in a toilet. Which is kind of, that's how dedicated he. And I think there's a great
You're
lesson in
saying
this story.
traveled, meaning he literally had the bathroom
Him
as
and a
his.
few, they essentially filled the toilets with people because they then ended up standing the majority of the flight, but they kind of went for the takeoff. It's some convoluted story, but that's the
Yeah,
general
yeah,
gist, was that there were more people on the flight than there should have been, but they were basically getting people back to Israel because essentially all these young men, who were there on holiday, wanted to
yeah.
return home to their families and to fight for their country, which is sort of. It's funny that this is a moving story because in fact it should be the accepted norm of
Right.
society, right? So anyway, so that happened, and my first response was, we have Visegrád 24. Obviously, we have to cover this,
Oh,
and
I
then
totally pronounced it wrong. Okay, my mistake.
no, I mean, no one really knows how to pronounce it, including myself. I'm not entirely sure because it's pronounced Visegrád in Polish, and
Oh, so it's a Polish word.
well,
Okay, now
actually,
it
it's a
makes
Hungarian
sense.
word.
Okay.
It's a town in Hungary.
You really like to put people through a loop, I see. So
Yeah, it
you're
really is.
a
But
a
anyway,
deep
so we
cut.
start covering October 7th and then the following days. And this is kind of, I sort of just assumed that there would be an outpouring of sympathy because it was the sort of normal reaction. And to my shock, horror, and dismay, I suppose the most shocking thing perhaps of all at the time, when I sort of think back, it's been almost 2 years to the day now. I suppose one of the most shocking things that happened was Sammy Doon coming out in Berlin and handing out cookies on October 8th.
Who is that?
Sammy Doon was one of these Islamist organizations like Hizb ut-Tahrir or the Muslim Brotherhood that functions in
Sure.
the West. It was then banned from functioning, but kind of, I guess that was sort of the moment where I went, you know, my expectation of however Israel will be covered is completely and utterly wrong. And as time went on, you sort of realize, well, the first thing that one has to do is sort of think, were I Israeli, how would I respond? What would I do? And then you sort of look at it and you realize, well, actually, there's a number of hostages. This is an incredibly complicated situation. And, and obviously I have empathy for, obviously one does. And the fact that one has to repeat it is sort of, is in and of itself silly. Obviously I have empathy for the Palestinian people. Obviously I wish all people all the best. All one really wants for the rest of humanity, if one is a normal person, is to see people prosper, generate capital, have families, have children, have what more can you want for the rest of the world? And then you kind of realize, and this is the great mistake of the Western world, which has been defeated by its own victory, of assuming that all people share our desires and hopes for the future.
That's
And
a
the more
beautiful,
you look,
by the way, Stefan, I love that. Defeated by its own victory. It really
completely, we have been
stuck.
completely defeated by the West is the West's victory is so complete. We have unprecedented levels of wealth, unprecedented levels of comfort. We have unprecedented levels of technological achievement. I mean, you look at the tech that surrounds us, and it's like no one's had it as good as we have ever in the history of ever. We live better as, a middle-class Westerner fundamentally lives better than the vast majority of kings in the Middle Ages.
Yep.
In terms of just what you eat, in terms of the dentist, right? Like
I mean,
you take it for granted, but
you could say a lot of the food, especially in the U.S., has a lot of shitty quality stuff. But the
but
access to man, just
the
the access, the fact
access,
that a fridge, I'll look at a
yeah,
fridge dispenses ice and water whenever you
yes,
want.
yes,
It's a crazy. It
correct.
really is something
It
we're
really
just.
is. It's just there, right? And you say, so you kind of, and you look at that, and we've essentially become completely and utterly directionless. And this is one of these things that Francis Fukuyama describes quite wonderfully in his book, The End of History, which most people completely misinterpret. But fundamentally, what Fukuyama says in that book is that a people that have no cause or no sort of common purpose or shared mission or direction will end up making up problems to defeat. And this is we've literally, this is what we're seeing, right? So you asked me, sorry, I'm giving you an incredibly convoluted answer to a fairly simple question. The reason I haven't covered my natural instinct, aside from the fact that I did actually have a number of Israeli friends before October 7th happened, and I did know people in the Jewish diaspora. So I had an affinity and a sense of kinship, perhaps. Um, my natural instinct would have been to say, here's a horrific war. Yeah. And then you look at the balance of information and you realize, and again, and I wouldn't, there are some Israeli propagandists, and all of us know this, who will
Sure.
deny any atrocities against the Palestinian people, who will deny any atrocity against the people in Gaza. Obviously, horrific things are happening. It's a war. In wars, war crimes happen, terrible things happen, people die, right? But all of that is being covered, and it's being covered, ad nauseum. I mean, like you can't get away from it. So there's no kind of,
It's the only
and then
thing really
obviously you
being
have
covered. There,
what?
I mean, other conflicts and other wars are covered, but I mean, not even. It's a crumb compared to this war. It's not even close. This
Correct.
is
And you
this
look at
is on the billboards of world media
it,
now.
it
Nothing,
is
everything else is being thrown away, and everything else is like you'll see it come onto your algorithm ever so often. You'll see like
ever so
Nigeria,
often.
Ukraine,
Barely,
whatever. Barely, yeah,
barely,
barely.
barely. I mean, Nigeria is one of those conflicts that we have been covering for at least 3 years, and it's not even a conflict. It's not even described as a conflict. I mean, it's a silent genocide.
All right.
And I occasionally get messages from Nigerian Christians that are incredibly moving, sort of, and they're really heart-wrenching messages saying, thank you so much. The entire world's forgotten. You're one of the only accounts who ever mentions us. And the same happens
If
with
the Jews were doing it, if the Jews were at war with them, they would be all over the news.
all
I
over
can
the
promise you
news,
that.
all
I can
over the
promise.
news.
I can promise you that if the Jews are involved in any conflict with anyone, it'll be front page for however long the conflict goes on. If the Palestinians, just a real thing, if the Palestinians were at war with another group, it likely would not be covered whatsoever. Nobody would give a solitary fuck.
That is actually most likely the case. That is entirely correct. And then obviously the great tragedy of all of this is that the sympathy that one does have for the people of Gaza, and you see the images, and the images are absolutely horrific. Obviously, and I know that probably some of my Israeli friends would disagree with this, but if you look at it just as a casual, just as a not even a casual observer, as an observer, you look at it and objectively you go, okay, these people are suffering. This is horrific. Um, but the real issue is that, and this is in context of the peace plan, is you have a peace. So you have people shouting genocide for 2 years, and then shouting starvation. And then there is a concrete peace plan presented, 20 points. I've gone through those 20 points. I even made a video about those 20 points, looking at those 20 points. The majority of those points, fundamentally, were you to analyze that plan, it's a plan to establish a prosperous and functioning society in Gaza, to rebuild and to essentially enrich the people of Gaza, right? It's like, give back the hostages, disarm Hamas, we will build you a prosperous society, and additionally, a pathway to a two-state solution. Surely this is everything that the pro-Palestinian crowd has asked for and more. Surely. And then you see the response to the peace plan, where you get, you look at, there's a number of Palestinians, Ahmed Fuad al-Khatib and a few others, who are opponents of Hamas and who are, decent individuals and who would like peace and who would like a way for a two-state solution to function. Go, yes, this
I
is
think
a good.
he's also. I think he's also terribly wrong, and I don't know. Again, we'll go into why two states will never happen, but yeah,
But that's a different topic, right? But the pro-Palestine crowd surely should be going, this is it, we've won. We've got everything. There's the plan, it's written out, there's 20 points. We will now make sure that this happens. We will make sure the population of Gaza is wealthy, prosperous, safe. We will turn the Gaza Strip into Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and more. And then you see all these Westerners going, no, don't take the peace. And it's like, you're shouting genocide and now you're telling them, don't take the peace deal. Well, you want the genocide to go on. So, and this is kind of where I'm going with this, is that fundamentally my biggest gripe with Palestine is not with Palestine itself, is with the fact that Palestinianism has been hijacked by a movement of this alliance of, and everyone said this, I'm not saying anything revolutionary, this alliance of, on one hand, Islamists, and who have very successfully infiltrated Western civil societies. The Muslim Brotherhood functions unfettered, unopposed in the UK, in France, in the US. You obviously have CARE, organizations, Hizb ut-Tahrir, etc. Numerous organizations, large migrant populations, unassimilated, who have now found common cause with Western leftists, essentially bored Westerners who have no cause. And their one cause is the destruction of the West. And if you can decolonize Israel, if you can deconstruct Israel successfully, you then have a blueprint of the deconstruction of the rest of the West. And obviously these things are happening in tandem, but fundamentally that the effort, the war waged on Israel is a prelude or as an episode rather, or as a chapter of the war against the West, where these two forces, and we've seen it, we brought up Iran before, we've seen before the alliance of Islamists who have a marriage of convenience with bored Marxist students, oftentimes students, of course, and then the first thing that happens, the moment they create that power vacuum and they fill it in, the Islamists turn on the leftists that got them to power. And it's very frustrating to watch this happen in real time in the West. It's actually infuriating. It's just I'm just talking about it. I'm getting irritated. Because also it's also so obvious. I feel like we're saying the obvious over and over and over again, sort of saying, look at the people, and I say this obviously about the Westerners. I don't blame Muslims, be they first, second, or third generation migrants in the West, for allying with their brothers in the Ummah in Palestine or Gaza. Obviously, it makes sense, right? But the Westerners who've made this alliance with them, who run around and chant, and obviously all these songs are very catchy, right? I mean, the Free Palestine slogans and the free from the river to the sea, it's all packaged, it's all a lot of fun. I can see that they're having a great time going out into the street and protesting, and I can see that it gives them a sense of purpose. I understand all of that, but it's incredibly frustrating because it's fundamentally, they are being weaponized against us, right? I mean,
Right.
You look at it obviously from a Jewish perspective. I will look at it from a Catholic perspective. But fundamentally, you and I are both in essentially, we will be the victims if these people succeed. And it's incredibly frustrating.
With everything in the world going on now, Israel's going to have a very hard time changing minds. I think the reality is in the West, a lot of young kids who have it good. They may have it good, they may not have it so good, but there's this anti-establishment kind of desire. Everyone wants to go against the establishment, create
Yes.
this equality for everyone. We're moving into this Islamic communist kind of society where capitalism is bad, the evil rich man. The Jews are seen as the rich oligarchs. They have all the money, they have all the power. We're going back into the way of thinking of Nazi Germany to an extent. We're at the center of everything, which is always so strange to me. But I don't know. It's almost seems esoteric how, no matter what we do, when we assimilate or we don't assimilate, or we're rich, we're poor, we're smart, we're not smart, we're one way or another, we're thrown into blame for something else. Not to say that our shit doesn't stink at all, but it's very, very strange that, no matter what direction we take, it we it's presents a difficult situation for us. And you have people like yourself and others that
But
I think,
perhaps to bounce into what you're saying,
yeah,
one of the things is that Jews are fundamentally not a monolith, right? So the thing that happens is, for example, the frustration on the conservative right is with an overrepresentation of liberal Jews in for example, in promoting open borders, right? There has been an overrepresentation
yeah,
of
yeah, we oh, I
right.
don't
Like
like it.
this is not a George Soros being the kind of the embodiment of, right? And then the accusation is, so there's a frustration that goes, and the frustration specifically of the conservative right is this: it's kind of the conservatives look at Israel and say, "Ha, here is a state that we would like: strong borders, strong demographics, very patriotic population, conscription, so sort of the forming of the IDF being a very crucial aspect of Israeliness, right? You don't really have Israeli civil society without the IDF.
Totally.
That I would argue that's probably a case that you can make. And so people on the conservative right go, you get these conservatives, they look at Israel, they're like, we would like this. And then they will conflate all Jews with Israel, which in and of itself is the first mistake. Because in fact, were you to look at the Jewish diaspora, the vast majority of American Jews have not been to Israel. Like most of them have no real link to Israel, in fact. So you suddenly say they go,
At this point, it's a little. At this point, I would like to look at percentages because the ones in my circles growing up, many of them have.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean it really has to do a lot with the liberal. It's not just liberal. It's the Jews that grew up with no real connection, maybe more in the reform community, who see Judaism and being Jewish very much as this cute traditional idea where they,
mm-hmm.
once a year, ever so often, they connect to it, but it's not really a part of their lives. Those are the people that really don't speak any Hebrew. They don't read Hebrew. It isn't really much very connected to them. When it comes to the war going on, that's when they're super Jewish, but otherwise they're very, very much not connected to it. And those are often the Jews that have these very, very woke ways of thinking, globalism, very pro trans rights, things like that. Things that unfortunately I think are not very conducive to a strong society. And they do so, I believe, because they think that it's righteous. They think that it allows for freedoms. I think many of them have good intentions with it, but it comes from this sense of what I started to coin as academic brain. They look at
Mm-hmm.
everything from this idea of, well, what would be the nice thing to do? What would make everyone feel included? We don't want to offend
Sure.
anyone. It goes very much against the principles of human nature, the idea of tribalism,
Sure.
the ideas of nepotism, ideas
Sure.
of meritocracy, things that are best for human beings as individuals and societies as a collective, oftentimes are best at the uh, going through difficulty, going through challenge. And what unfortunately woke people like to do is they like to remove challenges. They like to make everything easy for everybody. Let everyone feel welcome. Let everyone forget about earning it. Let everyone just receive things to make them happy. And so the more you implement those things, the more you end up having less patriotism, less hard work. You have a lower degree of professionalism. You'll have this is really what communism is. You'll have doctors that are unqualified. You really have no
Mm,
top level surgeons. You have
mm,
everything is mediocre at best,
mm.
likely shitty, and so this is a problem, and I think a little bit just quickly, a lot of Jews are guilty of taking a part in this, and I'm not going to disagree with that. There's a big issue with this because through all of this persecution that they faced, they think that they're feeling the pain of other people. Well, we were put through so much through so much pain. We want to feel the pain of the subjugated, the pain of the less fortunate. But the problem is when it comes to Islamism, they are taking full advantage of that weakness, that appeasement. They also think that by being these sweet people, these ever-loving people, they'll gain the sympathy of people who hate Jewish people, for example. So anyone who doesn't have a strong understanding of what I'm mentioning in terms of the need for meritocracy, uh,
Mm.
the need for tribalism, there's certain things in societies that don't work. I believe that just don't work, especially long term. So
Tell me
anyone,
about the division between, um, tell me as a conservative Jewish American, Rafi, how
so
do
we're
you have,
switching this. I'm being interviewed now. I like it. Okay, go ahead.
tell me about your relations with, say, do you even interact with any Jews who kind of look at you and go, oh, you're a fascist? Do
Yeah,
you,
there's
so like, obviously, so if I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, it's Israeli Americans, so dual nationals who are Israeli and American, about 70% of them voted Trump, 30%
yeah.
voted Kamala, thereabouts from the studies that I've seen. And conversely, in America, Jewish Americans, it's estimated because the number doesn't really exist, but the estimate was that it was the opposite. 70% of Jewish Americans voted for Kamala, 30% of Jewish Americans voted for Trump. So you can already see, Jews in America more likely to be liberal, Jews in Israel more likely to be conservative. So tell
Because
me about.
it's very oh that's but if you look at it, it's so simple. It's so simple when you understand it because there is a pretty strong left wing in Israel because this
Of
issue
course.
largely exists. And I'll have you know, the left wing in Israel it has a much higher percentage of Jews that lived in your Ashken what you'd call Ashkenazi Jews versus the what primarily makes up the right wing are Sephardic and Mizrahi. And it's not to say that it's a simple divide. It's not to say that there's
Sure.
just this all Ashkenazi are liberal. Not at all.
No,
There's
no,
many
of course.
many
Because I
Ashkenazis
mean,
are very
Bibi being the face of it all. I mean, Bibi, Smotrich, and Ben Gvir are all Ashkenazi.
no, they're not. Ben Gvir is Mizrahi.
Is
Ben
Ben Gvir is
Gvir's
Mizrahi?
yeah.
Is he really?
Yeah. Kurdish and Iraqi, I believe.
Is he?
Yes, he is.
That's such news to me. I'm Googling it now. Oh, that's
There's a
really
bunch.
interesting. I didn't know that. Oh, actually,
You're
you're
still
right.
of
He
you,
doesn't. Yeah.
you're still of the belief that everybody in the Israeli government's Ashkenazi, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I was going to say that some of them are. I mean, Bibi obviously is, right?
Here's another thing I want to touch up on. I don't want to dilly-dally too much, but another thing that really grinds my gears is that you'll have a lot of anti-Israeli content creators that go, "Oh, fake Jew Bibi. His name is really Milkowski." Jews, Jews, But here's the thing that really it's so funny. It's the same thing they play with the stolen food and everything we
Mm,
do is stolen. Let's just quickly dive into this a little bit. Last names didn't exist when Jews settled in Europe. When Jews were living in Europe, mainland Europe, Germany, they weren't last names. Meaning when we first got there, you can look this up. So what
sure.
kind of name were they supposed to? If a Jew is living in Poland, I come to Poland, last names aren't a thing. What are you going to name me? You're going to name me based on my occupation. You're going to name me based on where I live, maybe who
Or
my
your
mother or
father.
father is,
Yeah.
family. But even so, you had Jews with the last name Cohen. You had Jews with the last name Davidson. You still had there was a Hebrew element to the last name,
Sure.
but it might still like Davidovsky or something like that,
Sure.
or
Sure.
Davidovich. Right? There's still
Sure.
Hebrew in it, but it's
David, of
Europeanized,
course.
so to speak.
Sure.
What like? what do you the same way you had Jews that were in Syria or Jews that were in Yemen, they'll have a name like Tsanani, which is Sana. You'll have a name like Adani, which is connected to Aden. You'll have a Jew from um, why am I forgetting what the English name for Halab is? Is that Damascus? No, maybe is it Damascus? I don't know. But either way, you'll have a name like Halabi. A Syrian Jew will have a name like Halabi.
Mm.
But those names aren't contested. The Mizrahi Jews are largely seen as authentic. Like even the pro-Palestinians will be like, yeah, I mean, I don't even know if they're real either, but they kind of look more legit, whatever. It's all this perception. Like they seem poorer, they seem more dark, maybe they're the real ones, but the Ashkenazi ones, nah, not at all. But the propaganda somehow shows us our noses are long, we got black hair, we look nothing like a typical German, or even like you have a very non-Jewish face. Most people looking at you would not assume you were Jewish, right?
No, they would be correct.
Right. But you see, like
I have very non-Jewish physiognomy. That is correct.
that's for sure. But you see, I say this to say that so much of our the whole perception of just Ashkenazi Jews being completely illegitimate, but
Mm,
yet in Europe we were seen as non-Jews and killed for that reason, largely. Meaning they also blamed us for similar things, like we were pushing liberal ideas, but then Hitler was saying, okay, we weren't Aryan. We're not the pure race. We got to
sure.
get rid of them. So then we go to Israel, where the Nazis would argue that we're from. They would argue that we're Semites. So we go
Yes.
there, and then they're saying, no, go back to Europe. But we were just killed in Europe. So according to people that hate us, we don't belong in Europe, but we also don't belong in the Middle East. Then you have the Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews with the same issue. When they were in Arab countries, there were
Of
periods
course.
where they were
Of course.
accepted, but they were seen as non-Arabs. They were seen as Jews, as ethnic Jews, even in those countries. Then when they come back to Israel, a lot of the Muslim world and a lot of the people who don't like Israel are saying, no, go back to the Arab countries you came from. So no matter what, in both, when we're talking about both Jews, neither we're accepted in either place, in a sense.
Sure.
You know what I'm
No, you
saying? So
have. Yeah, yeah. No, no, of course. Of course. Of course. Of course. But I was going to ask you about how do you perceive this split between conservative Jews in the US and liberal ones?
oh, I was getting to that point. I was getting to that point.
Yeah, that's where we were going with
That
this.
was Israel. Israelis have a much stronger sense of identity a lot of the time. They're physically tougher, they're mentally tougher on average. Many of them have military experience, they've been through war, they grow up a lot earlier. They have a very strong connection to their country. Yes, American Jews love America, but Americans don't have a threat to their lives on a daily basis.
No.
When you have a country like Israel, where growing up you have so many enemies, what
Mm,
naturally happens? You develop this closer bond, not only to your people, but to yourself in a way. Because well,
mm.
without my grit and
Yeah.
my strength and the people around me, we're all together, we're all holding hands. But there then creates this conservative way of thinking. But when things seem to be very safe, or at least the illusion thereof, you start to get softer. Life becomes easier. You naturally get
Yeah.
softer. The whole that whole saying of strong people and the whole thing. I'm not gonna
Strong men create good times create weak men create tough
create
times,
hard
tough
time,
times create strong men.
right? And so,
And on it goes.
yeah, and it
And on
constantly
it
it
goes.
constantly cycles. It always cycles. So with Israel, I believe it's a little different because we haven't really had the luxury to get too comfortable. Every time things seem to die down, and maybe
Well, it sort of
societies.
almost did, right? Before 2023, it almost was. Like there was a sort of sense of perhaps, things were getting better.
You could say that to an extent, but we're still always dealing with conflicts. We might not have a war like October 7th,
Of
but
course. Of
Ashkelon is
course.
still getting rockets. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
the West Bank is still in turmoil. So you still have mandatory conscription. It's not to the extent of, say, maybe Brits or Americans. It's
Yeah.
there's still this eerie sense of conflict, but Israelis learn to
And
kind of ignore it.
and do you think that American Jews have become more conservative on average since October 7th? Do you think that there's a
In
more
I do think so. It definitely depends on state, and it also depends on background. The Jews, again, even in America, I would say, that come from more of a Mizrahi background probably will lean
Mhm.
more to the right because their families understand a lot of these
Sure.
things. Ashkenazi Jews, even from the Soviet Union, may understand it to more of an extent. The Jews that are highly, highly secular in the US that weren't raised with more of a religious background
Mm.
often tend that's a lot of the time what I see is the divide is. And again, it's not there's a gray area here, but I find that the Jews that grow up in the States with more of a Jewish background where they go to Jewish private school, especially if it's a religious school, even if it's modern Orthodox, they tend, if they do vote liberal, they're still going to be very pro-Israel. But the more religious they go, the more conservative they're going to be. And it's because at the end of the day, whichever religion you look at, they're going to have more conservative values because religion itself is in
Of
and of
course.
itself conservative.
And do you
So
think they've become more linked to Israel in the last 2 years from your observations? Would you say that there's kind of do you think that Zionism has increased amongst American Jews since October 7th?
I would say overall yes, but then there's again, you have definitely your number, but let me try to break it down for you. I can't give you stats. I don't have stats in front of
Mm.
me. This
I
is
don't
my
think the
perception.
stats exist, but I think it'd be very hard to poll this.
Yeah,
It'd be
I'm
quite
always
hard to
questioning.
poll
I
this.
always question, to be honest, man, I always question stats, the validity of stats. When it comes down to being pro-Israel, I think before October 7th, a large percentage of American Jewry was because it was more convenient for them to be. But now that there's so much smoke, so many people around the world are criticizing Israel, I think out of fear, certain Jews are distancing themselves because they can't handle the heat, they can't handle the pressure. I don't want to be
Mm.
involved in this. This is too much. People are
Mm.
dying. I'm Jewish, but I don't want to deal with this. I'm scared for my family. I'm scared for
Mm.
my livelihood. I don't want to be attacked. I don't want to lose my business. I don't know. I just don't want to be. I don't want to deal with it. And
Yeah.
that's an issue. You have the freedom to do that, but the problem is when you outwardly speak out against Israel as a Jewish person. I don't talk about criticizing, but you have to understand that aside from the challenges the country has, like any other country, it's not perfect. It needs to prosecute this war. And the sad part is as much as I can respect somebody who has criticisms, when you're saying that
Hmm.
the war needs to end, regardless of any circumstances, the war just needs to end.
Mm.
You really have just such a lack of understanding. And all it really is I want to be I want a virtue signal because I can't handle conflict. But
Yes.
the reality is ending this war under any circumstances doesn't favor either side, and quite frankly, it doesn't do any favors for the Middle East. So that's why I'm not into this plan. I think that any sort of idea of two states, the plan here isn't to create two states. The plan is to give the Gazans another shot effectively under a new leadership, which I think is a futile idea.
Mm.
One state needs to be established. There needs to be sovereignty over Gaza, meaning Israel needs to claim sovereignty over Gaza and the West Bank, and then give the the not citizens, the Arabs that live there, local governance. This is what I believe, kind of like an Emirates plan. So if you want to hear more about the idea, there's an Israeli historian, Dr. Mordechai Kedar. I'll send you some of his information. I've had him on my show before. Brilliant guy, knows all about he knows all about Islam. He knows all about Middle Eastern history. He speaks fluent Arabic. He's been on Al Jazeera and many other media sites. He's spoken to them in Arabic, and effectively Israel would rule the entire land. There would be no Palestine. There would be no prospect for Palestine, but the Arabs would have their towns and villages like they do. There would be a tribal family that would rule either one village or multiple villages, and that would be the case. They wouldn't necessarily have citizenship, but they would have residency. And that's because we can't be a ruling body if we're not the majority. And if we gave all the Gazans and all of the West Bank Arab citizenship, we would pretty quickly lose our Jewish majority. And it's complicated because in an ideal world, I would love to give everybody citizenship, but you have to consider not all of them are going to be friendly to us. Most of them won't be. So that's what needs to happen, and I think we're prolonging it. I think this 20-point peace plan is going to bring us back to square one again. We're eventually going to have to fight another war. It's Hamas now. It'll be another group later called ABC Jihad, and they'll fight us again, and we'll inevitably have to do what I think we should do now, which is it's very challenging, and Israel's left with an incredibly difficult choice. You saw what happened in the UN. You saw how many people walked out of the room. But I think, unfortunately, this land is either going to be ruled by Arab Muslims or it's going to be ruled by Jews. It's not going to be, it's not going to be split into two pieces. It's not going to happen.
I think it's a fascinating country. I do think that it is a blueprint of. I think that conservatives around Europe, not necessarily the US. Again, I'm not American. I haven't spent extensive amounts of time. I've been to the US. I haven't spent enough time to really understand it. But speaking as a European, and I have spent time in many European countries and lived in several, I definitely think that Israel is a blueprint on how to build a patriotic civil society. And I think that it should really be a great source of inspiration, especially as Europe starts to face very serious demographic challenges. I mean, very serious. The demographic challenge that we're currently facing is, if it is not addressed now, it will wipe Europe off the face of the map. It's what is happening is the willing and cheered on replacement of Europeans is horrific. I mean, we were both in London, obviously, a few weeks ago. I don't know if you had the time to walk around London, which is now a minority white British city. The demographics of certain neighborhoods, certainly of Tower Hamlets, for instance, have just changed beyond recognition. And it's deeply concerning. And I look at Israel. I guess to me, the conversation, it's always interesting kind of what people's motivations are to be interested in Israel. I mean, obviously, aside from just having friends there, and I've spent a fair amount. I've spent a good few months in Israel over the last few years. The motivations of one's interest in Israel. I think there's kind of sort of the healthiest approach actually is to not really have an opinion at all, because you're sort of focused on your own people and on your own country and on your own problems. This is the kind of bizarreness of the pro-Palestine movement, is the vast majority of these people probably don't even know a single Palestinian. And they're there, body, mind, and soul, just fully focused. I mean, imagine giving up every Saturday, for 2 years to go march on the streets.
Well,
Imagine the time investment, right?
For some of them, it's their only job. For some of them, they're making some money doing it. But like I think from a psychological level, it comes down to the wealthy group subjugating the less fortunate, and the less fortunate in this case is, of course, to what they believe the Palestinians. I mean, they are less fortunate. The Israelis objectively have it better, but there's a very clear reason for that.
Correct.
And again, it goes back to the Palestinianism idea. The Muslim world and everyone who supports them are throwing a group of people into the fire in order to create an issue for the Israeli state to exist, to eventually have the ability and the tools to wipe it out. And so, unfortunately, this group that was created in 1964 as an ethnic identity. Prior to that, it was not an ethnic identity. It was part of the larger Arab world, and it still is.
Sure.
They were created as this ethnic identity, and now you have what seems to be two ethnic groups fighting each other. But in reality, it is the overall Arab world against the Jewish state. You can argue some of the Arab world has made peace with Israel. I doubt it. I think it's conditional. I don't know how true it really is. That you saw Saudi Arabia say, "Oh, if Israel annexes the West Bank, then we may, lose this Abraham Accords." If they
Saudi
really
Arabia is part of the Abraham Accords yet.
if they really cared about peace, then they would understand that as counterintuitive as it may seem to them, and it's not counterintuitive at all. I think it's incredibly logical.
Mm.
Um, let me kind of backtrack. It's not to say the two-state solution sounds very pragmatic when you don't consider the religious element. And the religious element is the primary driver here. And the reason so is because anyone who believes in Islam at face value doesn't believe that the Jews can rule Israel because they're taking a slice out of the Islamic caliphate.
Yes.
As long as Jews rule Israel, which is a prime piece of real estate for the Islamic caliphate, the Islamic ummah, as they say, there's an issue and it needs to be solved. And that issue being solved is we need to get rid of Jewish rule, put Islamic rule back in the land. And until that happens, until all of it is Muslim, there are going to be people fighting us for it. And what Israel needs to do is Israel needs to create such a hard deterrent, which means starting with annexing everything. This is all Israel now. This is all Israel now. No more Palestine. Do we understand? The Arab will say, no, we don't get. Okay, we're going to deal with it until you understand. We're going to respond accordingly until you understand. Do you get the message now? Do you get the message now? Okay, we get the message. Okay. They might attack us in another 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. But as long as there's a relative peace, we know we've accomplished the goal. You get what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, we have to live with each other. We're always going to live in the world with different groups of people with different beliefs. The idea that what are humans going to do? Just genocide each other until there's only one group? Because that's what empires have essentially tried to do. We have a group that disagrees with us. We want their money, their power, their resources. We're going to try to take over the world, implement our ideas and beliefs. But it never works. Never works long term. Even if the Arab world can dominate the Middle East, parts of Africa, and parts of Europe, there's always going to be a group that fights them. So
Let's hope.
this is the challenge of human history, Stefan. The challenge of human existence is I don't think we're ever going to live in a world where we have permanent peace forever unless there is some
No,
Messiah.
because life is a permanent set of battles.
Right.
Endless. It's an endless set of battles. Nothing is won eternally.
Well, that's what's so
except the
frustrating. Except for what?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
What were you
true.
saying? Except for what?
Except the afterlife.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And your place in it.
Are
Now
you a
that is
devout
eternal.
are you a devout Catholic? Are you a
I am
religious
a
person?
Roman Catholic, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, dude, what am I gonna say? What am I gonna say? I'm a proud Jew. I'm also a proud American.
Mm.
You know, I don't claim to have all the answers, man, but I think I've understood what makes most civilizations great. And I think it's allowing for freedoms, but not allowing freedoms to take away your freedoms, meaning not to allow freedoms
Correct.
to allow the insufferable and the intolerant to take advantage of you. And so
Correct.
the West is wonderful. I think their love for freedom is fantastic and they should push for it, but they also have to have very clear boundaries, very clear
Yes.
standards, whether that is literal borders or whether that is what they allow in their country and what they don't. And I think that that's subjective. Some country might feel that certain freedom of speech is okay, certain freedom of religion. At the end of the day, no country and no people are going to agree on everything. We will never have universal agreement on things. And I think turmoil and conflict and good and evil, they'll always exist. Um, but what is strange is that the West is so much of Western society is siding with people such as Hamas, for example, or similar groups that share nothing in common with them.
Nothing. But it is, you pointed it out. It's essentially a misguided, it's a sort of, Christianity does create a people who are very empathetic, right? Where we see human suffering and we want to alleviate it. And there's also a great element of obviously supporting the underdog in Christendom. It's fundamentally a sort of Christian idea. And then if you strip a society of all religious aspects and just leave the overriding values and sort of benefits of, they eventually erode. And you pointed it out. It's essentially Westerners look at Israel and Hamas, or the IDF and Hamas, and Israel and Gaza, or Israel and Palestine, and they see a David and Goliath situation, and they go, "Oh well, this poor underdog, and we should probably cheer him on because this is unfair." That Westerners see it as some sort of great unfairness. And in actual case, it really is just a very, very big misunderstanding of the
Well,
situation.
it's the total opposite. It's the total opposite because the reality is the Jews are the David in the story, very much
Yes.
so. Because this is not a fight between Palestinians and Jews, or Palestinian or Palestine and Israel. This is a fight genuinely about a large portion of Islam, not just Arabs, but a large portion of Islam versus Judaism. It's a religious war between Islam and Judaism. That is what it is at its core. The
Yeah.
whole land dispute is a cover. It's a blanket to cover the fact that that's what it really is. And brilliantly, they created the Palestinian narrative, the Palestinian people, the idea of the Palestinian people, to remove the idea of a Jewish state, ignoring Jewish history, ignoring Jewish persecution, not making much importance of it, and then thereby removing the Jewish state, putting Islam back where it was. That's
Mm.
effectively, and it's also the idea that Jews took away the Arab honor by all these wars where we just embarrassed them militarily. And not long before that, we were dhimmis, we were second
Of
class in their
course.
countries where they could do it. Now we went from being second class in their countries to absolutely embarrassing them in military victories.
Yeah.
And so when you combine that
Yeah.
with their religious commandments, what they believe are commandments, and their desire to earn their honor back, you have a pretty you have a pretty lost group of people, a group of people that would rather fight a tiny group of people than progress onward, than focus their time on
Well,
progressing
and
onward.
this is where you see the kind of the great success of the United Arab Emirates and of
100%.
and of the Zayeds, who've really managed to lead, this country, a sort of Bedouin people from the desert into an incredibly prosperous and successful society. That not only, I mean, you look at Abu Dhabi and Dubai, and you can argue they're soulless, and they don't have the charm of a European city, and so on and so forth. But you also look at the Emirati people, and this is an interesting thing, is that they've managed to attract massive Western wealth and money, huge amounts of Western liberal expats who are busy leading very liberal lives in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. But the Emirati people, as a people, very conservative and very proud Emiratis, um, with a very sort of sensible version of Islam.
It's
And
you see, it's
impressive.
kind of
I've
similar to
spent some
Israel.
time in the Emirates, and I've really enjoyed my time there.
It's kind of similar to Israel in many
Yeah,
respects because it allows
yeah,
for freedoms, but it sets clear boundaries. I would argue Israel has gone a little too far. I think it needs to be a little bit more conservative in certain respects because it's in the Middle East. Israel wants to be loved by the world. It's a trauma we have. And so we push ideas that are not so conducive to the Middle East. And
yeah,
so I think that, let
yeah,
me just be very frank here. Let me be very frank here. I personally don't have an issue with gay people. They don't bother me. They do them. I do me. It's between me and them and God. I don't give a damn who you love. Love who you want. That makes the difference. I know gay people. They're wonderful people. They're very nice. I don't care. I really don't care. That's me personally. Um, but Israel always loves to say, "Oh, we're the gayest place in the Middle East. We're the only ones that have these parades." I don't think that's a flex. It's not a
No,
flex.
I don't think so either,
So
Rafi.
so and and
But
and
I'm very curious where you're going with this, but
yeah, you're surprised I'm saying this, aren't you?
it's quite surprising. Yeah, I am quite surprised. I was not
Because it's
expecting
it's
the
because
conversation
the
to go here.
reality is it's something that a lot of Jewish people say, but we also we really want to be accepting. And the reality is I don't want a society, I don't want an Israeli society that, God forbid, subjugates them, kills them, arrests them. That's the last thing I want. I want them to be
Hmm,
free like anybody else. But straight people aren't having parades. At the end of the
sure.
day, we also have to acknowledge it's Israel. If we as Jews, here's something, because if anyone gay is watching this and they're super offended and they think I'm gonna say, I'm saying what I'm saying with my chest, but I also want to give context. If the Jewish people want to claim that this is our ancestral homeland and we have ties to it, and it's the place of our, it's the birthplace of the Jewish people, which it is. But then we're mentioning gay pride parades as as one of our most proud achievements.
Yeah,
There's a disconnect.
there's a
and
disconnect.
and if the and if the
I
Muslim and if
really
the Muslim
understand what you're
world
saying.
and if the Muslim world is looking at it, they're saying, well, Jews, you keep telling us how this is your land, this is your ancestral homeland, this is the land God promised you. Act like it, because this doesn't really seem like the way you get there. And again, people are going to misunderstand me. They may call me whatever they want. I actually think if people have the ability to think with nuance, they're going to understand. Now, I could understand a leader. See, here's the challenge. The challenge is, if you have a prime minister that comes in at, maybe whether it's right after Bibi or three prime ministers after Bibi, and says no more pride parade. The focus here is not on the parade. It's a deeper discussion that
Yeah.
I'm gonna get to. But if a prime minister comes and says we're not going to have any more pride parades in the country, the liberal Israelis and the liberals in the world are going to freak out and say, "Oh, look at this! Israel's becoming a theocratic state. Israel is
Mhm.
losing its freedoms. You have an extremist in the prime minister's chair. Now you're taking away the pride parade. Next thing you know, they're going to be hanging them in the streets. People are going to
Yeah,
be freaking out that one thing is going to lead to another, and before you know it, Israel is the new Islamic regime in Iran.
100%. Yeah.
But the reality is yes, I could understand why gay people or anyone on the left would have that fear. I would have that, meaning I would be extremely fearful if Israel had a prime minister that said, "Oh, we're going to start killing gay people." No, I would be not only would I'd be opposed to that. I don't have a word to describe that. That is not a society that I would support. But um, there has to be a sense of traditional values to some extent. You want to, I can understand giving freedoms, but the country is Israel. It's the Holy Land. The problem is we are Jewish people that want a state in Israel. If we decided if Zionism was in Zimbabwe or in Tanzania, I can understand. But the again, this is a religious conflict. This is like a super important conversation. It's a super important conversation. If the Muslim world is ever going to accept the Jews living in Israel as authentic
Mhm.
Jews living in the authentic Holy Land, the Jewish people have to do certain things that show very clearly that these are Jewish people living in the Holy Land. Doing something like a gay pride parade in Tel Aviv very much makes that much more challenging. Now, you could argue, well, the Arabs should learn to modernize. They should learn to reform. Yes, they should. I said this when you interviewed me. The Muslim world has a very big problem with not reforming. It's not
Mhm.
conducive to the vast majority of Western and non-Islamic society. That is also true. But this this situation of pushing ideas that are very non-conservative, you can do them if the country wants to continue doing. I don't personally care about the parade. Like I have my beliefs in God, I have my beliefs in Judaism. It doesn't bother me. I really could give a shit less. This is my personal opinion. You want to have your parade, go right ahead. I'm not this religious fanatic that's like, no, you are. You want to do it. But understand that certain things in the Middle East, if you are a Jew and you want to live in your ancestral holy land, there are certain things that are conducive to that and certain things that are not conducive to that. This is a very logical thing. People are afraid to say it. People are afraid to admit it. But what I'm saying is actually like it's a huge component. It's really crazy. Yeah.
Well, bouncing back on that, I would say a huge component of the West being great is that it was Christian. I mean, there would be no West without Christianity, and the big
These
problem, I
are,
think, the decline of
but
the
here's what I
West is
want to say
very
because I
strongly
forgot.
linked to the decline of Christianity.
I couldn't agree more. But Stefan, here's one thing that I wanted to say earlier, but I wanted to let you finish your point was when you were mentioning Christianity is a religion that's extremely forgiving and tolerant. What would you say to the periods in history where Christians were slaughtering people, conquering land, doing what Muslims, you could argue what Muslims are doing now? What would you
But
say if
what are you referring to specifically?
the Spanish
The
Inquisition,
Crusades?
the Crusade, yeah, the Crusades, Christianity
I mean,
conquering
the
what?
Crusades were a responsive war to centuries of Islamic conquest and Islamic
Mhm.
attacks on Christendom. I mean, I don't think, I mean, the Muslims went uh, spread across the Middle East and spread across North Africa, all the
Mhm.
way through Spain and all the way up to Poitiers, where Charles Martel stopped them. And then they were pushed back for centuries out of Spain. But they also went through the Balkans. I mean, in the 17th century, in 1683, they reached the gates of Vienna. They were stopped by the Polish King John III Sobieski, who charged down with 18,000 winged hussars down the Cannonberg and stopped Islamic expansion into the West. Um, the Crusades were a response to hundreds, thousands of Islamic raids on
Mhm.
European coasts, right? So I don't think the Crusades were some great terrible thing. Um, you have the institution of the church is obviously a fallible one because it's run by men. I mean, there were periods of history in which the church was corrupt. There were periods of history in which the church did injustices, but fundamentally, I think that Christianity is most certainly a force for good. Obviously, as a Christian, one is obviously called. We believe as Christians. I suppose ones that are familiar with theology that that we believe that Roman Catholicism is the one true religion, and as such we're called to want to. Um, we believe that we will be saved. And as such, we're called to convert people, right? Um, so, you ask me about periods of history of the church in which the church did bad things. Well, the answer is I'd say, God is infallible, but man is. Mm, I don't think there's any comparison between, say, I sort of see where you're going with this. I don't necessarily think there is a comparison between Christendom and Islam. Um,
Mhm.
if you look at the Islamic faith, you look at the Islamic holy books, um, you look at the hadiths, it's very hard. It's very difficult to look at that and say, when you look at the New Testament, the New Testament, I mean, even the if you the God of the Old Testament, the God of the Torah, is fundamentally a much more vengeful God than the one of the New
Mhm.
Testament, right? I don't know how familiar you are with the
I'm
New
not
Testament.
gonna have one here. So, Stefan, before we go there, before we go into like a whole theological discussion, my point really is to say that I think
Mm.
all three religions have components of violence and peace. You could argue maybe Islam
Yeah,
has
of
the most.
course.
You can argue Christianity may have the least, or Judaism.
Sure,
I'm not a theological scholar, so this will be
sure.
a moot point. what I will say is, what I believe, just a side point, is I believe Judaism existed and other groups came to be. Replacement theology is a primary driver for anti-Semitism, and I think it always was. I think it's one of the most primary drivers, is that this idea of the chosen people. The Christians came along afterward and said, "No, Jews, you screwed up. We're the new Jews." The Muslims came by afterward and said, "No, Christians and Jews, you both screwed up. You're no longer chosen. Neither of you, none of you are chosen. We're
Correct.
the,
Correct.
we're the new chosen." And I think that is the primary reason why not only Jews have been so persecuted, because it was easy for them to be. They were a smaller group. They were largely successful throughout history, and it was the "you killed Jesus" thing. It was the idea that Islam considered us descendants of apes and pigs. So no matter what we did, no matter how virtuous we
Hmm.
might have been, no matter what we contributed to human society,
Yes.
which is endless, people didn't focus on the good; they focused on the bad,
Oh,
primarily.
100%. 100%
So
agree with
and
that.
so
Yeah.
and again, and so the replacement theology component is what's driving the Middle Eastern conflicts. It is such a big proponent of what's driven violence between people. Now, if humans didn't have religion, I don't think religion is the primary cause. Meaning, religion is such a beautiful thing, but if it's used incorrectly,
Correct.
it's fucking horrible. But if we weren't fighting, if religion didn't exist, we'd be fighting over something else.
I
So
mean, look, the great murderers of the 20th century were mostly atheists. So no, no. So and atheism is, of course, a form of, believing in nothing is believing in something.
yeah,
Um,
Christian.
you know,
Yeah, go ahead. No, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, that was the entire point that I was going to make. In short, is that believing in nothing is believing in something,
It is for
and you
sure.
do have modern day atheism has, and you see this very closely reflected in, you have a creation of, the sort of the Church of Atheism has created its own martyrs. Saint George of Floyd, as the memes declared him. You have a version of the sacraments. You have a version of confession, which is white guilt. You have the priests of the cult, which is the Marxist academics,
Mhm.
spouting things about white privilege and the necessity of DEI. So you actually have, if were you to look at it exactly, you realize that actually many of the deeply religious aspects, from martyrs to priests to
Mhm.
sacraments, to all of it, is replicated in a very bastardized, fundamentally, I mean, especially when you go back to BLM. I think that's a really interesting moment in time, of a lot of directionless people, asking, it is fundamentally deeply Christian, asking for forgiveness, right? Confessing to an original sin, that being
It's
white
pretty
guilt.
dope, man. I think it's pretty dope religion for that reason. You know the term dope. I haven't used that term in a while.
Mm.
It's an American slang. It's an American slang that just means like it's awesome. Yo, that's dope. It's
Yeah,
a it's a it's so great. No matter what you do, you just go to the Father and you ask for some Hail Marys. That's we have Yom Kippur. It's actually
of
starting
course.
very soon, so I'm gonna have to hop off soon.
Correct.
But yeah, I mean, God puts us through some shit. We have
He
to really
really does.
apologize. We got to apologize. We got to do a lot of apologizing. I'm going to be apologizing
All of
more to
us,
older people.
Rafi, all of us need to. And then, no, that's a very serious point. I say it with a smile on my face. The more serious the topic, the more likely I am to smile. But we really do. We really do. I do think that it is crucial for us all to. I think religion is a very important thing. I think that certainly the greatness of the West lies, in great part due to its faith. Also, very unique people, of course. I also think that having banned cousin marriage about 10 centuries ago, as Europe became, majority, dominated by Christianity, certainly played a very big impact.
That's a fundamental. No cousin, no
I
marriage. He's
bring
no
that up
first cousin.
because specifically of the extraordinary messaging of the NHS recently, in which they
Oh
promoted
yeah. Where they think it's a good idea.
as being good for economic bonds between families, which I thought was really rather entertaining until you realize that Pakistani Brits, who are about 3% of the population, but are responsible about 33% of congenital birth defects, and you go,
I just saw a video. I just saw a video of this. Did you guys post this? It might have been Visegrád. If I'm saying that right.
it may
It
have
might
been.
have,
What was
it might
it?
have been you guys. There was a three kids in one Pakistani family. All were blind and deaf, I think.
No, that wasn't. That sounds too sensationalist for us. I don't think that was us.
Okay, I'll send that. I'll send it to you. But anyway, here's by the way, here's a wild thought, but it's to me, it's just so true. Another religious thing. I think
Mm-hmm.
no matter how much the world seems to hate Israel, the world looks at the Jewish people to see how they are operating as a people, and they see them as an example. And I think this really comes down to the fact that we are the original monotheistic religion of the three, and there is a large, and I'm going to say this with my balls on the table. A lot of the world, because of the whole chosen people thing, Christians and Muslims are saying to themselves, is it true or is it not? Are they still those people or did they lose it? And I think much of the world still questions that and will always question that. And I think that is a major point of contention. The world saying, well, are you chosen? Well, you're not acting like it. Because if you were, you would act differently. And that's why we're held to such an incredibly high standard. Because if the world, well, nah, look what they're doing in Gaza. They can't be the real Jews. They can't be chosen. Nah. Okay, so Islam is right. Okay, so Christianity is right. So Catholicism is right. You guys are not
Mm.
perfect. If you were chosen, you would be almost perfect, if not perfect. And so we're always going to be held to an impossible standard. But I think this goes back to my discussion about the parade, about the gay parade, is that Israel is going to be not only judged, but it's going to be emulated. So certain components, no matter whether they're on the hard right or the hard left, the world's going to look at us and say, how is their military operating? How do they deal with immigration? How do they deal with financing? How do they deal with business? How do they do tech? How do they deal with accepting minorities? And much of the world is going to look at us as an example. And anyone who grew up in an Orthodox Jewish school has been told this by rabbis. It's an incredibly true thing. It kind of gives me this you could say epiphany moment, but I've been told this growing up, and I know I'm talking to someone who's Catholic, and uh, it might sound I don't know how you digest what I'm saying, but it's so spiritual, and it really doesn't seem like my point is necessarily that logical. I mean, maybe you could argue it is, but I think from the spiritual religious perspective, it just history seems to point to this. Like history seems to what I'm saying. It makes sense to me. You know, because I don't know, we've been such a focus throughout history. People liked us or loved us. We've
Mm.
so many of the major wars, the Jews were always in the story. Economic, whether it was economic prosperity or decline, somehow we were always in the middle of it. Whether it had to do with religious conflicts, we're in the middle of it. In one way or another, that there always seems to be a mention of Jewish people in some form or fashion. Um, I don't know. I don't know. It makes I don't know. I don't know. I don't really I can't really say I totally understand it, but maybe it's this. Maybe
Yeah,
it's the
I definitely think the religious aspect is incredibly important.
right. What to make of it? I couldn't tell you, man. I couldn't tell you because I don't know. Like we have three religions that have three different beliefs in what the outcome is going to be, like what the prophecy is going to be, and either one of them is right or none of them are right. That's the scary truth. Because if we knew for a certainty they were right, we would only believe in one of them. We wouldn't have difference in opinion.
True.
And everyone's so certain, meaning you as a Catholic, I bet you are certain as anything
Pretty
that you have
certain.
the truth, right?
I
But
mean,
everyone else is,
I would hope.
but your certainty, you share the same level of certainty than devout Muslims and devout Jews. It's just the
I mean,
reality.
it's
Meaning,
always
in
an
your
element of
mind,
doubt, right?
huh?
I mean,
What?
it's Pascal's wager at the end of the day in many cases.
I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm not.
but I do believe I am a Roman Catholic. Yes.
Right. No, but anyway, we've gone on so many different topics. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Oh,
It's
it's great.
interesting that yeah, it's interesting the way different guests. I've done 200. This is going to be the 236th episode, and depending on the personality of my guest, they go very differently. You clearly have been doing media for a while. You're a great communicator,
I appreciate it.
but
Thank you, Rafi.
yeah, no, of course. Some guests really will sit there and they will kind of wait for the conversation to be guided. They'll completely do, but uh, you're very proactive. You're very proactive conversationalist. So the conversation was very, very natural, and it almost feels like we're sitting down. I mean, that's what I like.
Just having
That's
a
how I like.
chat. I wish we were sitting in person because it's actually so much more pleasant to sit in person with someone. I actually find
Without a doubt.
I actually really dislike Zoom conversations. It just doesn't the what's the word? It's quite late. I'm quite tired, so my
The
words
internet,
and it's
the
very
internet block, the internet
yes.
border, whatever you want to call it.
There
Of
is
course, dude.
it.
Zoom can never
No,
equal
no. The
never does the
COVID
trick.
the COVID people who were saying it was the end of in-person meetings were in fact wrong. Surprise.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think they can still be great conversations.
Of course.
I really enjoyed our discussion, but it
Thank you,
doesn't,
Rafi.
and it
No,
helps
so
that
did
we
I.
met in person. It helps that we met in person
I
prior to
did.
the discussion.
I did. Of course.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I hope
But
to see
listen,
you very soon in person, Rafi.
likewise, likewise. You definitely let me know if you plan on making a trip to the Sunshine State. We have a lot less clouds than you do.
A
Sunnier.
lot less. A lot less.
You're a pretty positive guy for somebody that lives in such a gloomy country.
Oh, we have to be. You got to smile, Rafi.
Agree.
So
I
much
agree.
misery going on in the world. I mean,
Crazy.
be depressed all day long otherwise.
Yeah, it's crazy. The world's a crazy place, man. Human beings, it really comes down to when you step out of it for a second, you realize we're a wonderful ball of
Yes.
chaos, dude. Like we're human beings are
Yes.
just they're so brilliant and they can be so wonderful and kind and selfless, but they can be such evil, evil creatures.
Yes.
And we all, I think, to an extent, some more than others, but it's amazing what human beings we can all justify this is right, that's right. I think there are objective truths. I think there's objective good and evil. I don't think that everything is a nuanced
I
good.
agree.
Some things are very much black and white,
Strongly agree.
and we agree on I think what many of those things are. We agree,
Yes.
just
Strongly.
yeah. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to your feedback, and I especially with the comments on the pride thing. Would love to have open dialogue about it. People are going to misunderstand it. I just had a gay gentleman on my podcast 2 episodes ago, Daniel Spaulding. He's a
Yes.
wonderful human being.
I know him.
Wonderful human being. Wonderful human being.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you know who he is?
I've met him, yeah.
It's funny. I don't know what his take would be if I mentioned this to him, but he's a very intelligent guy. And I think even if it would upset him,
Intelligent people are able to have a conceptual discussion that doesn't
he's a
right?
very bright guy. He's a very bright guy. He's very deep. I think as much as it might like insult him a little, or he might feel a little like I wouldn't say triggered. I don't think he gets that way. I think he would very much understand what I mean. I really do. I think
Yes.
he would get it. But anyway, ladies and gents, make sure to check out Visegrád or Visegrád. It's Visegrad on Instagram, YouTube. I imagine you're on
X.
X now
Most of
too,
all X and our
right?
website, of course.
Yes. So make sure to check them out. Make sure to follow me at Rafi the Realtor. Of course, subscribe to this channel, smash the like button, and I look forward to having you on the next episode. Peace.